public service announcement that you should probably never buy Combat Patrol Space Marines from Games Workshop's web store. For a number of different reasons, I'd argue it's the single worst Combat Patrol purchase that you can possibly make. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Space Marines once more, and I thought it was worth stopping off to make a quick video about the recently released Space Marine Combat Patrol box set, which, as you can probably guess right now, I feel is directly redundant, similar to the Tyranids one, but beyond that even objectively quite bad even if that weren't the case. I think this is worth underlining to people, as it definitely will catch at least some people out. Some people will buy this from Games Workshop's web store, despite it being a directly inferior deal, just because it's held up alongside all the other Combat Patrol boxes, which in general do tend to be quite good deals in themselves. It's just not really very obvious for the casual consumer who's just not switched on with Games Workshop's pricing things. I do kind of understand why they do it, seeing as it's basically a separate sort of offering to their starter set bundles, but at the same time it does feel kind of disingenuous to have two different routes to buy the same models, and one that's arguably the more obvious one, somehow being a solidly worse deal than the less obvious. The reasons I'd argue it's the very worst Combat Patrol is that it's directly redundant, so the same as the Tyranids, you can literally buy these miniatures by buying other kits separately, but this time even the theoretical discount that you get for buying the Combat Patrol is worse than the Tyranids, and that does look to be the very worst of literally any Combat Patrol they've released so far. To the extent though I was kind of surprised that they have released this at the same price as the others. In this video let's talk through the box's contents versus buying other similar miniatures separately, and the many better options that you might have if you wanted to acquire specifically these miniatures. First up, for the box contents itself, these guys cost you £95, €125 and $160. In the box you get a Terminator Captain, Terminator Librarian, 5 of the Monopose Terminators, the ones that come in Leviathan with the Assault Cannon, and 5 Infernus Marines. It's maybe not terrible in terms of points that it gets you on the table, partly due to being very character heavy. 460 points is sort of low to middling out of Combat Patrol boxes. Admittedly, I do think that the quality of the actual sculpts here is really quite nice. All pretty new miniatures from Leviathan. The Terminator Librarian's pretty fun with his inlaid runic armour. The Terminators went down very well indeed, and the Captain is the cool Tyranids themed one, stomping a Screamer Killer head into the dirt, though it might be a little bit less appropriate for other armies if you don't happen to be fighting Tyranids all the time. While the sculpts are nice, they are monopose though, so that definitely is one disadvantage. The Terminators don't get you the Cyclone missile launcher that you can now get on the ones that are sold separately. And the Terminator Captain does just come with the Power Sword and the Storm Bolter. The separate one that's going to be coming fairly soon for him will have other options. Otherwise the unit mix is a bit weird really. You've got 2 Terminator characters and they both can't attach to the Terminator squad. They're just not really very efficient to run at all if they're being run separately. Though you are locked into doing it that way if you are playing the actual game of Combat Patrol as opposed to wider 40k. Kind of means that if you want to use the characters efficiently, you already need to pick up another set of Terminators at the very least, which maybe isn't ideal. Might just be a little bit less interesting for some Marine players as well, as I suppose quite a lot of people will already have these exact models from Leviathan, meaning that the Combat Patrol isn't that great from that point of view. What struck me when this was announced as the Space Marine Combat Patrol though is that just literally looking at the miniatures in the set, it does look like it's the lowest value in terms of models out of just about any of the Combat Patrols that they have at the moment. If you bought the miniatures separately, the Terminators we now know are £40, the Infernus Marines would be roughly half a standard Space Marine 10-man box set, so like £19 going by the Assault Intercessors. The Terminator Librarian is sold separately for £24, and the Terminator Captain, I'm going to guess, is going to go at the slightly inflated price of £26. That's going by the new Chaplain that they've got coming out. Just going through these prices directly from Games Workshop, that gets you to £109, which to be honest just isn't really very meaningfully more than the box set is sold for in the first place. It's £95 versus £109, and that means that you only get a £14 or 13% discount, and that does make it the very lowest out of any Combat Patrol box sets that Games Workshop currently sells. Generally, even the worst ones tend to have a discount of around about 20%. I believe that the Grey Knights one is that, but at least you get basically the entire plastic range of the army, so it does have that going for it. The very best ones tend to go in the realm of almost half off, so around about the 40 to 50% discount mark. It means that even if other kits didn't directly exist to outcompete this, it would already be a very questionable purchase in my mind. Unless you actually want to play specifically the Combat Patrol game for these miniatures themselves, you'd basically be locking into exactly these miniatures when you might well have wanted something slightly different in combination. Plus the kits are monopose, so as mentioned you will miss out on options compared with buying the full fat multi-part kits. And also, I don't particularly like the fact that a lot of that theoretical value is coming from characters as well, which I feel like Games Workshop overcharges for full stop. It's £50 in total of the theoretical value from the librarian and captain, and they only get you two admittedly fairly cool infantry-sized miniatures, a very tiny amount of plastic for all of that money invested, kind of like the Deathwatch Combat Patrol box set that's seen as a bad one. And part of the reason is that that one's heavy on the character units. Same as the Tyranids box set though, it does seem to be just directly inferior to buying the starter set and the librarian separately, which is again very weird. The 40k starter set gets you these miniatures on the right, most of the Combat Patrol for Space Marines versus most of the Combat Patrol for Tyranids. That's far cheaper at £65, €85 or $110, and then you just need to add the Terminator Librarian, which they do sell separately, for £24 or $38. Just adding those prices together, and it means that you're basically paying less for the full Combat Patrol Space Marines, plus all those Tyranids that you get included into the bargain, which admittedly you may or may not want. But even if you just literally bin the Tyranids, you'd be saving £6, €8.50 or $12. And often you can either just resell the Tyranids if you don't want them, use them as a painting project, or split the box with a friend if someone wants these miniatures specifically. It basically means that on no account you should pick up Combat Patrol Space Marines. You should basically always buy this, though arguably for many people it gets even worse. Like the Tyranids one, and perhaps partly because Games Workshop knows that it's an inferior deal, this one's only available direct only, so through Games Workshop's web store. And as most seasoned Warhammer collectors know, you can often just order in things for cheaper prices via local gaming stores or online retailers. I have a bunch of them that support the channel linked in the video description below, things like Element Games in the UK and Gap Games in Australia, and a few others. It means that you can even add an extra 15 or 20% discount below the price that you'd be paying separately, and you could get the 40k starter set plus the Terminator Librarian for well under £80 from these independent retailers, so stacking a saving on a saving there, and doubling down on the reasons to avoid the Combat Patrol box set if you do live in a region where you have some reasonable third-party discounters. For all the reasons listed above, I would conclude that this one is probably the single worst Combat Patrol box that Games Workshop offers, although I do know that there's a fair few more unpopular ones out there. The ones that ranked the very lowest when I did a poll the other month were the Death Guard and the Thousand Suns ones. They're unpopular just because you get hordes of their cultist type units and less focus on the actual Marines in the box sets. But even these, I'd say, are better pickups compared with the Space Marine Combat Patrol. First up, the theoretical discount is definitely better. Compared with buying the Death Guard kit separately, it's around about 36% off, so an actual meaningful saving. Though it's more like 25% for the Thousand Suns, though it does come with some bonus Zangor upgrade frames. The Space Marine one is just worse than that because it's not a discount compared with the starter sets, and even if it was, it'd be kind of questionable versus just buying the kits that you wanted anyway. And I would argue that even these do have good value if you are starting either Death Guard or Thousand Suns. They're just a box set that you'd probably only get one of, and rather than seeing it as a core box to start the army, I'd see it more sort of a cultist type expansion to the army, adding a small horde of their raised cultists to act in support for the main Marine force, even if it isn't going to help you too much with collecting the core of your army. If I were starting these factions, I'd probably get exactly one of these combat patrols, but then save the main effort for other things. Otherwise, perhaps the main one to compare it to is the Tyranids Combat Patrol, again a box set that in theory you should just never really buy, as again you can do the same trick by getting the 40k starter sets plus the Barb Gaunts, and it does have some similar issues with weapons. Similar to the Terminators, the Termagants only come with the Flesh Borers here, where you might want to give them things like Spine Fists or their special weapons. I'd certainly argue though that this one just gives you a lot more value for your money than the Space Marine half of it. You get an effective 44% discount on these kits bought separately, going by some roughly estimated amounts for things that aren't released individually. That puts it right at the top of discount boxes, around about half off, as opposed to the Marines' pretty pitiful 13%. I think you can just tell just literally by looking at the miniatures though, you get far more plastic on the Tyranid side of things. There's 32 miniatures versus 13 out of the Marines, and the Tyranids even get a monstrous creature into that cost there, which I think compensates for a bunch of the other miniatures being a little bit on the hoardy side, I suppose. As I mentioned when we talked about the Tyranids box last time, the reason that they do this is that it's a similar situation to Necrons in 9th edition, the weird time where a box of Necron warriors would cost around about the same price, or in some cases even more than this recruit box set, which basically did include a box of Necron warriors, plus a Royal Warden character, Space Marine Lieutenant and Assault Intercessors. I think the reason that they do this is to basically keep their pricing consistent, to make their starter boxes look like a really good deal, which admittedly they are as far as Games Workshop goes. but then they'll keep their other offerings just consistent with things that they're priced elsewhere. Even if it does mean in 10th edition it will make absolutely no sense to pick up a Space Marine Combat Patrol. I guess from their point of view it's still worth having the box set out there to maybe underline the better deals that they have elsewhere. And I guess for the few people who do wind up buying them, I guess largely due to being misinformed or just wanting the experience of the Space Marines all in one box set, I suppose that's all well and good for them as they've just sold less Warhammer for more money. As with the 9th edition sets, the 10th edition starter sets are likely to have their usual edition 3-year lifespan and then they'll go away, much like you can't get Recruit edition now for 40k. And then after that, I guess for a time the Combat Patrol will be the only way that you can get those miniatures, making it a bit more acceptable, although for the reasons mentioned before, I still think that it's not particularly great value. In any case, let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Feel free to share this with anyone who's tempted to pick up the Space Marine Combat Patrol, just for a bit of discussion as to why you might consider other options, and let me know your thoughts on the Space Marine release in general. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly keep the videos like this coming. Hopefully have plenty more for the Space Marines over the next few days. And finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention the discount retailers that help support the channel that are linked down in the video description, places like Element Games in the UK, Gap Games in Australia, or now Fenris Workshop in Canada. All of these guys sell Games Workshop's products at a discount, usually ranging in the 10 to 20% off type region, and I absolutely would take advantage of anything that you have locally. If you are collecting Warhammer for the long run, you will save lots of money over time. If you click on any of the links in the video description below before making a purchase, a small amount goes to help support Auspex Tactics without costing you any more whatsoever when you do buy something. It helps support the channel and does save a little bit compared with Games Workshop's prices. An absolutely massive thank you to any and all of you guys who have been using those. It really does help support the channel and keep all these videos coming, and I do appreciate you guys helping me keep on doing what I do. In any case though, an absolutely enormous thank you for listening. Looking forward to talking some more Space Marines in future videos, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.